She's been described as Australia's worst female serial killer.
You murdered this man.
Yes,
You tortured him.
of course.
These twisted individuals have managed to blend seamlessly into society, fooling everyone around them with their innocent facade. It's mind-boggling to think that their corrupted minds could go undetected for as long as they did. So, join us as we unveil the stories of 15 of the cruelest serial criminals and unravel the incredible ways they managed to evade capture for such extended periods of time. Number 15. Jamie Osuna. Let us tell you a bone-chilling tale from the grim streets of Bakersfield, California. Jamie Osuna was born on March 7, 1988, into a world stained with violence, narcotics, and unspeakable abuse. His stepfather and uncle were downright monsters, inflicting unimaginable pain on him. By the time he hit his teenage years, the criminal world had him firmly in its clutches. His name was on the lips of local law enforcement, and not in a good way. But here's where things take a chilling turn. In 2011, Osuna's true colors were revealed when he was accused and later convicted of the most gruesome, gut-wrenching crime imaginable. He abused and took the life of Yvette Peña, a 37-year-old woman from his own hometown. The trial was like something out of a horror show, with Osuna shamelessly taunting the grieving family from his prison cell. That guy had no remorse, no soul. Oh, and have you seen his face? It's like a canvas of evil. Behind bars, he etched all sorts of wicked symbols onto his skin, an inverted cross, the words Satan and evil inked on his eyelids, and a pentagram tattooed right on his forehead. This dude wore his wickedness with sick pride. But wait, there's more darkness to come. In 2019, Corcoran State Prison became the stage for another horrifying act. Osuna's cellmate, Luis Romero, also met a grisly end at his hands. Now, the wheels of justice are turning again for Osuna as he awaits trial for Romero's homicide. It's like a twisted dance of sanity evaluations and legal loopholes. First, 2 psychiatrists said he wasn't fit for court, but then they changed their minds after he spent some time in a psychiatric prison. And here's the freaky part. Despite all his monstrous deeds, Osuna somehow managed to find someone who loved him. Joelle Castellano, also known as Jane Osuna, married him back in 2010 at his grandmother's house. But guess what? Just 6 months later, he got arrested for hurting her too. Yet Jane remains unwavering, still professing her love for that cold-hearted man. Number 14. Tamara Samsonova. Tamara Samsonova is a woman whose chilling tale earned her the terrifying nicknames the Granny Ripper and Baba Yaga. Now, she may seem like your average grandmotherly figure, but don't be fooled. This elderly lady has a dark secret. She's a brutal killer who confessed to taking the lives of at least 15 people over a span of 2 horrifying decades. Her marriage to Alexei Samsonov seemed pretty normal until he mysteriously disappeared in the year 2000. Little did anyone know that Tamara was behind his vanishing act. Not only did she admit to murdering him, but she also shockingly confessed to gruesomely disposing of his remains. When the police searched Samsonova's apartment, they discovered a diary that exposed a treasure trove of horror. In this diary, she meticulously documented her murders, effortlessly switching between Russian, English, and German. She blended her chilling entries with mundane details of her daily life, like her sleep habits and coffee preferences. It was in these pages that she confessed to her ruthless killing spree, claiming that an astrologer's prediction had driven her to commit these heinous acts. Accused of a grisly cannibalistic act, Samsonova's tales of lung consumption sent shivers down the spines of investigators. With a history of schizophrenia and multiple stays in psychiatric facilities, Samsonova displayed eccentric behaviors that added another layer of eerie intrigue to her story. She would flirtatiously wink, blow kisses, and make outrageous claims about being an actress, ballet dancer, and linguist. In 2017, the court declared her insane, and she was committed to a psychiatric hospital for compulsory treatment. Now, here's the truly disturbing part. Amidst all her horrifying acts and confessions, Samsonova showed absolutely no remorse. Instead, she believed she deserved a medal for her deeds. It's a twisted and dark twist to her terrifying saga. Number 13. Rodney Alcala. Born in 1943, Rodney Alcala emerged from the shadows of San Antonio, Texas, destined to become one of America's most infamous serial criminals. Raised in a turbulent household, he's already showing signs of mental instability, getting expelled from school and all. In 1961, Alcala's encounter with the law began. He was convicted of attempted assault and spent a year behind bars. But guess what? Freedom doesn't exactly straighten him out. Nope, he makes his way to the Big Apple, New York City, posing as a photographer. But behind that seemingly harmless job lies a more sinister motive. Young women become his prey, and it was in the bustling city that he's believed to have committed his first murder in 1971. Fast forward to 1977, he moved to California, and that's where his chilling criminal spree really kicked into high gear. Alcala knows how to lure his victims. Can you believe he even appeared on The Dating Game in 1978? He won a date with the Bachelorette, but luckily it never happened. That same year, he got arrested for the murder of 12-year-old Robin Samsonova. But here's the crazy part. Alcala's first run-in with the law wasn't the end of his reign of terror. Appeals and overturned convictions land him back on the streets, free to continue his dark deeds. In 1986, he was arrested again, this time for the brutal murder of Jill Barkham. The conviction sticks, and in 1989, he's sentenced to death. However, the true extent of his crimes are still unfolding. In 2010, Alcala's monstrous legacy expanded even further. He was convicted of taking the lives of 4 additional people: Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, Jill Parenteau, and shockingly, Robin Samsonova again. This totals 8, but authorities believe the actual count could soar as high as 130. Can you even wrap your head around that? Now let's fast forward to July 24, 2021. Alcala's time in this world came to an end. While sitting on death row, he passed away of natural causes at the age of 77. It's a chilling reminder of just how dark and horrifying a human being can become. Number 12. Dennis Rader. Now we are talking about the most infamous in American history, Dennis Lynn Rader, or as he's more famously known, the BTK Killer. That's short for Bind, Torture, Kill, a nickname he came up with himself. His crime spree started in 1974 and didn't stop until 1991, leaving 10 people in his criminal path in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. Rader was born on March 9, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, and was brought up in Wichita. He was a pretty normal kid by all accounts. He even got his Eagle Scout badge and studied criminal justice at Butler Community College. He also served in the U.S. Air Force for a couple of years. After his military days, he worked regular jobs. You know the drill: assembly line worker, installing security systems, the usual stuff. Rader was a churchgoer, led a Cub Scout troop and all that. He looked like the average Joe, too. But man, he had a terrifying secret. In 1974, Rader began his dark criminal journey. The Otero family were his first victims, 4 of them, murdered in their own home in Wichita. Over the next 17 years, 6 more people, including Nancy Fox, Shirley Vian, Vicky Wagerl, and Joseph Otero Jr., would tragically lose their lives to his violent impulses. The guy got a thrill from writing letters to the police and the press, bragging about his horrific deeds and signing them as BTK. He stopped writing for about 10 years, but in 2004, he couldn't resist and started again. This time around, he left a digital trail, a floppy disk he'd left at a library with photos of his crimes against his victims and a video of him. The cops were able to trace this disk back to him, and they arrested him on February 25, 2005. In court, Rader confessed to taking the lives of 10 people and received 10 consecutive life sentences. He's now serving his time at the El Dorado Correctional Facility. Number 11. Zodiac Killer. You know, when we talk about mysteries that have stumped the world for decades, the story of the Zodiac Killer has to come up. This guy was a real nightmare, terrorizing Northern California in the late 1960s. He's been the subject of so many crime stories and movies because even now, over 50 years later, nobody has a clue who he really was. The Zodiac didn't care where he struck, city or country, it was all the same to him. And from December 1968 to October 1969, 5 people from the San Francisco Bay Area, spanning Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, and even San Francisco itself, met a horrific end at his hands. The Zodiac wasn't just a killer, though. He was a real show-off, sending cryptic letters and ciphers to the police and the public, describing his crimes and making threats. The codes he sent were made up of all sorts of letters, numbers, and symbols. And while one message was decoded by authorities to say, "I like killing people because it is so much fun," the rest remained unsolved. Despite all the investigations and the hundreds of potential suspects, the Zodiac's identity is still unknown. No one has ever been officially charged with these crimes, so technically the case is still open, and that's a pretty creepy thought. As for what the Zodiac looked like, well, it's believed he was a white male, probably between 25 and 35 years old at the time of the murders. He would have been around 6 feet tall with a medium build, weighing around 180 pounds. He had short brown hair, brown eyes, and supposedly had a unique tattoo of a cross on the inside of his right forearm. He was thought to be intelligent and articulate, likely a loner and possibly a sociopath with a disturbing thirst for power and control. Number 10. Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez was pure nightmare fuel, the kind of character who'd send shivers down your spine even in broad daylight. Nicknamed the Night Stalker, Ramirez was no ordinary criminal. His name is like a synonym for monster, and for good reason. From 1984 to 1985, he went on a terrifying crime spree in California that included horrifically taking the lives of at least 13 people, along with a slew of other horrific crimes. Ramirez was born on February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. He was the youngest of 5 kids in a family of Mexican immigrants who had come to America for a better life. But life at home was rough, to say the least. His dad was a struggling alcoholic, and his mom was a staunch Catholic. His turbulent upbringing wasn't exactly the best start in life. Ramirez, always in trouble, even dropped out of high school when he was just 16. He did a short stint in the Navy, but that didn't work out either, mainly because of his drug habit. The real nightmare began in 1984. Under the cover of darkness, Ramirez would break into homes, usually targeting young women or couples. He had an arsenal of weapons, guns, knives, even hammers, and he'd attack his victims while they were fast asleep. But for Ramirez, it wasn't just about taking lives. He seemed to revel in the sheer terror he instilled in his victims. His reign of terror didn't end until August 1985 when a brave civilian caught him. When his trial finally came around, the extent of Ramirez's horrific deeds was laid bare. 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 assaults, and 14 burglaries. The court didn't hesitate to hand down a death sentence in 1989. He died of cancer in 2013 while still on death row. He was just 53 years old. His heinous crimes weren't just shocking, they were a disturbing look into the mind of a ruthless criminal. Number 9. Lawrence Bitticker and Roy Norris. You know how there are certain pages in American crime history that make you recoil, make your skin crawl? Well, Lawrence Bitticker and Roy Norris wrote one of those chapters. These two twisted souls, the infamous toolbox killers, horrified Southern California with a vicious 5-month-long spree of kidnapping, assault, and ruthless crime in 1979. We mean these weren't just your average sickos. These guys made weapons out of everyday items like pliers, wrenches, and screwdrivers, creating a real-life nightmare that's scarier than anything you could imagine. Born in Pittsburgh in 1940, Bitticker was troubled from the get-go. He was in and out of trouble with the law throughout his adolescence, and by 1974 he landed himself in prison for assault with a weapon. Norris, who was born in Greeley, Colorado in 1948, walked a similarly gloomy road. A troubled childhood spiraled into a conviction for assault by the time 1976 rolled around. And then, in 1978, these two psychopaths crossed paths behind bars. You could say it was a match made in, well, definitely not heaven. Once they were out, they wasted no time laying out their gruesome plan. By February of 1979, they were on the hunt, prowling around in a van they chillingly dubbed the Murder Mac and picking up unsuspecting hitchhikers to satisfy their twisted desires. Their reign of terror finally ended in June 1979. The two were found guilty for their abominable crimes and were sentenced to death in a court of law. Bitticker drew his last breath in prison in 2019, and Norris followed suit a year later. Number 8. Pedro Lopez. There's a name that brings an icy chill to the air whenever it's spoken. Pedro Alonso Lopez. Born on a day that should have been just another October 8, 1948 in Colombia, Lopez went on to stain his life and the lives of countless others with his horrendous acts of crime. Here's a man who's earned his horrifying credentials as a serial killer, a child assaulter, and now a fugitive. The terrifying number attached to his name is at least 110 victims between 1969 and 1980. But here's the kicker. The true horror might be even more staggering. Lopez himself claims that he snuffed out the lives of over 300 innocent souls across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. In 1969, he found himself behind bars for auto theft. Inside, he claims he was assaulted by a group of his fellow inmates. His alleged response? Well, it set a chilling precedent for the future. He took the lives of his attackers. When Lopez got out, he embarked on a nightmarish rampage of killing. His MO was nothing short of horrifying. He preyed on young girls, the most vulnerable, tempting them with the promise of food or money. He'd gain their trust, lead them away to quiet, unsuspecting places, and then he would violate and take the lives of his victims. So, back in 1980, Lopez got nabbed in Ecuador when he tried to kidnap a 12-year-old girl. His crimes caught up with him, and he was sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum sentence for murder at that time in Ecuador. But in 1994, after serving his sentence, they booted him out of Ecuador and he landed back in his homeland, Colombia. Yet instead of a homecoming, he was committed to a mental institution. However, even that didn't last long. He got released from psychiatric care in 1998. Now, here's where it gets even creepier. Lopez became a fugitive once again when he was linked to a murder committed in 2002. He's wanted, but as of 2023, nobody knows where he is. Number 7. Ted Kaczynski. There was once a genius, a prodigy, a master of numbers, and a wizard in the world of mathematics. But then things took a dark turn, when Theodore John Kaczynski turned his back on the society that nurtured his gift. You might better know him as the Unabomber. He was born on May 22, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois. Ted was a cut above the rest, boasting an exceptional intellect and a drive that led him to graduate from Harvard summa cum laude in mathematics in 1962. Not stopping there, he bagged his PhD in the same field from the University of Michigan in 1967. His knack for numbers landed him a gig as a math professor at the University of California, Berkeley. But then, something shifted in 1969. Ted swapped his promising academic career for a secluded life in a remote cabin in Montana. There, amid the solitude, the man and the Unabomber started to blend. Ted wrote his infamous manifesto, The Industrial Society and Its Future, right there in that cabin. Between 1978 and 1995, the Unabomber wreaked havoc with a ruthless mail-bombing campaign. He didn't just pick names out of a hat, though. He targeted those he believed were fueling the advancement of modern tech and contributing to environmental devastation. His campaign of terror took 3 lives and left 23 others injured. Now here's the part that'll give you the chills. For 17 years, no one knew who the Unabomber was. It was like living under a shadow of constant fear. And the person who finally shined a light on that shadow? It was David, Ted's own brother. He recognized the writing style in the manifesto and made the gut-wrenching choice to turn his brother into the FBI. By 1996, they had Kaczynski behind bars. He pleaded guilty in 1998 and got a life sentence without parole. These days, he's in the federal supermax prison in Florence, Colorado, a living, breathing piece of America's darker past. Number 6. John Wayne Gacy. If you know anything about John Wayne Gacy, you know his name is synonymous with pure evil. Born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, he had a tough upbringing with a father who was a violent alcoholic and a mother who did her best to keep the house running. Gacy was also a prime target for bullies. To top it off, when he was just 11 years old, a neighbor assaulted him. In 1964, it seemed like Gacy might be turning things around. He married a woman named Marlyn Myers and had 2 kids. He even became the manager of a KFC restaurant. But under the surface, things were far from okay. Gacy was convicted of assault in 1967 and served 18 months of a 10-year prison sentence. After he got out, he started his own construction company and got involved in local politics. By 1972, he was an alderman of Norwood Park Township. But by 1975, Gacy's dark side came to the fore in the most horrifying way. He began a terrifying crime spree, targeting young men. He would lure them to his house and then take their lives. His crimes remained unnoticed until 1978, when a 15-year-old boy named Robert Peast disappeared after visiting Gacy's house for a job interview. This triggered a police investigation that led straight to Gacy. In December of that year, the police found the bodies of 26 young men at Gacy's house. Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown because of his creepy alter ego, Pogo the Clown, or Patches the Clown, was finally arrested by authorities and formally charged with murder. Gacy was found guilty of 33 murders and sentenced to death. His life ended with a lethal injection on May 10, 1994. Number 5. Joseph DAngelo. A guy named Joseph DAngelo is born in Bath, New York on November 8, 1945. When he was just a kid, about 9 or 10, he witnessed something no child should ever see. His sister was assaulted by 2 airmen while they were living in West Germany. After serving in the army, DAngelo started out on what seemed like a good career path, had good education, got married, and had 3 daughters. He became a cop in Exeter and Auburn from 1973 to 1979. But then, something weird happens. He gets fired for shoplifting. Just a minor crime, but it's like a little peek into the dark stuff that's to come. Then in 1975, DAngelo's dark side starts to show. He took his first life in Visalia. His victim was a brave college professor who tried to stop DAngelo from kidnapping his daughter. From 1976 to 1979, he instills fear in over 40 women and girls, even targeting couples in their homes. But DAngelo's reign of terror doesn't stop there. He starts taunting the police and media with creepy letters and phone calls, even claiming he's taken the lives of more people than they know. Then, he moves to Southern California. From 1979 to 1986, he took like of at least 10 people and became known as the original Night Stalker. He also left behind traces suggesting an interest in Satanism and the occult. Then, suddenly, after 1986, he just stops. He slips back into his normal life in Citrus Heights, flying under the radar until 2018. Thanks to advances in DNA technology and genealogy, they finally catch him. His DNA matched distant relatives who put their profiles on public databases. In 2020, DAngelo pleads guilty to a laundry list of 26 charges, including murder, assault, and kidnapping. He gets a life sentence without parole, fitting for the years of terror he caused in the Golden State. His story is a haunting reminder that sometimes the most ordinary-looking lives can hide the most extraordinary evils. Number 4. Gary Ridgeway. On a fateful day of February 18, 1949, Gary Leon Ridgeway, and no one could have guessed that he would grow up to be known as the Green River Killer, one of America's most notorious serial killers. In SeaTac, Washington, Gary's life seemed pretty average. He worked as a truck painter, went through 3 marriages, and even had a son. But there's this dark side to him, especially towards women, that showed up in some really troubling ways, like incidents of assault. Then 1982 rolls around, and things take a sinister turn. Gary starts on a crime spree that lasts for more than a decade. His victims? Mainly teenage girls and women who are living on the edges of society, prostitutes, runaways, the kind of people whose disappearances might not raise immediate alarm. Here's how it usually went down. Gary would pick up these girls and women while they were hitchhiking or working the streets. He'd take their lives and then dump their bodies in out-of-the-way places. A lot of them ended up near the Green River, which is how he got that creepy nickname. Fast forward to 2001, almost 20 years after the first murder we know about. The law finally catches up with Gary. The authorities arrest him, charge him with 4 murders, and, thanks to some solid DNA evidence, they tie him to the crime scenes. Gary ends up confessing to taking the lives of 49 women and gets a life sentence with no chance of parole. Number 3. Aileen Wuornos. You know about Aileen Wuornos, right? The first female serial killer of the USA? In 1989 and 1990, she made headlines by shooting and robbing 7 of her male clients while working as a sort of escort along Florida's highways. She claimed that all these guys had tried to assault her, and that she took their lives in self-defense. Born Aileen Pittman on February 29, 1956, her early life in Rochester, Michigan was as rough as they come. She was the daughter of a teen mom who was both mentally ill and had a horrible relationship with her own dad. Imagine being abandoned by that mother when you're just 4 years old and then being raised by the same grandparents who had abused her. Yeah, Aileen's grandfather assaulted her too. She ended up running away from home when she was just 14 and started working to survive, getting arrested time and again for her behavior, theft, and assault. Fast forward to 1989, and she meets this woman, Tyria Moore, and the two quickly become lovers. They also become partners in crime, with Tyria playing a part in the robbing and taking the lives of those 7 men. In 1990, she was arrested, and she confessed to all the murders. She got convicted for 6 of them and got a death sentence for each. After over a decade on Florida's death row, she was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002. The whole thing stirred up quite a bit of controversy and debate. Some people argued that Aileen was a victim herself, that the abuse she'd suffered throughout her life drove her to commit crimes. But there were others who thought she was just a cold-blooded killer, using her rough past as an excuse. Aileen's life has been the subject of a lot of books and movies. The most famous is probably the 2003 film Monster, where Charlize Theron played Aileen. Number 2, Fritz Harman. In the early 20th century Hanover, there was a character, Fritz Harman, whose horrifying deeds earned him quite a few names. The Butcher of Hanover, the Vampire of Hanover, and the Wolf Man. Over the span of 6 gruesome years, from 1918 to 1924, this man was responsible for mutilation and for taking the lives of at least 24 innocent young men and boys. Picture him, a small boy in Hanover, born into a poor family in 1879. He was one of 7 children, 6th in line, to a carpenter father and a housewife mother. His childhood, though, nothing short of horrific. Regularly beaten by his father and even assaulted by an older boy at the tender age of 10, Harman had a start in life that was anything but pleasant. The story takes a turn as he grows older. He was a butcher by profession and a police informant by circumstance. Then 1918 rolled around, marking the beginning of Harman's terrifying reign of terror. He lured unsuspecting young men and boys to his lair with promises of food, money, or whatever baited them. Once inside, they met a grisly end. He would take their lives and dismember them, and believe it or not, be sold as meat to the local butchers. His bloody run came to a shocking halt in 1924, when one of his intended victims managed a daring escape. The law finally caught up to Harman. Found legally guilty of murder, he was handed a death sentence and met the business end of a guillotine blade in 1925. Harman's horrific tale is etched deep into the fabric of German history. It shook the city of Hanover to its core and cast a long, dark shadow over the collective memory of the German people. Number 1. Israel Keyes. Israel Keyes was a man who wore many sinister hats. Keyes was responsible for taking the lives of at least 3 people and a host of other horrifying crimes like armed robbery, arson, assault, and burglary. This rampage swept across the United States from July 2001 all the way up to February 2012. Let's back up a little bit. Keyes was born in Richmond, Utah, and raised in Washington State. In 1998, he decided to serve his country and joined the U.S. Army, even serving in Iraq. Once he left the Army, he tried to blend in with society, working jobs as a construction worker and a truck driver. The first victim we know of was Samantha Koenig, a young 19-year-old barista. One cold February day in 2012, she was taken from her workplace at an Anchorage coffee shop. Keyes held her captive for several unbearable days before ending her life. Afterward, he got rid of her remains in a nearby lake. Keyes' end began when he tried to use Koenig's credit card at an ATM in Washington State, and he was arrested in March of 2012. Once in custody of the authorities, he admitted to taking Koenig's life and several others, including a man named Bill Courier, in 2009. However, before he could face trial for his ruthless acts, Keyes took his own life in his jail cell in December 2012. He left behind a series of journals and letters that painted a chilling picture of his crimes and what drove him to commit them. Investigators believe Keyes was responsible for taking the life of at least 11, but the true number of victims remains shrouded in mystery. He was organized, meticulous, and went to great lengths to avoid getting caught. He often chose remote locations to carry out his crimes and would then hide his victims' bodies in unmarked graves. Which one of these gave you the creeps? Let us know in the comments. See you in the next one.